Hi, my name is Paul. I'm the pastor of Livingstone's Church, and I'm doing a number of videos right now on C.S. Lewis's book, Miracles. And the last couple of videos I did had a lot of philosophy in it, but I want to get into a little bit more theology and a little bit more of the Bible to try to help us. Well, I know a lot of my Christian listeners will be thinking more about the Bible and theology and not particularly taken with philosophy, so I wanted to talk about some of that. Now, when C.S. Lewis talks about nature, C.S. Lewis wants to talk about our relationship with nature, and actually a lot of this goes back to, if you looked at the last series I did, goes back to understanding the Bible. Now, part of the reason when I talk about nature and creation, and I draw this little diagram, the heavens above, the firmament or the vault, the seas, the dry land, is because actually, if you think about it, this is a very nice little schema in which to talk about the relationships between nature, supernature, maybe even subnature, and the Christian faith and how we view the world. If I, in fact, were to draw a big globe and stars around it, well, we would all identify that and say, yeah, that's true. That's our mental representation. At some point, I'm going to have to get into that question, too, in terms of representation. But this is actually a fairly handy way to talk about nature, subnature, supernatural, heaven and earth, and all the elements of the Christian faith. So when God creates the heaven and the earth, we talked about this quite a bit, the garden, it says Ezekiel on a mountain, and its relationship with heaven. In the fall, the relationship is severed. Now, when the Bible starts, the Bible talks about God creating. There's God, he's the creator, and then there is, in a sense, the world, or let's say nature, that he creates the moon and the stars, the animals, the dry land. And if you read, say, John Walton's book on the lost world of Adam and Eve, the lost world of Genesis 1, John Walton does a good job of going through how Genesis 1 talks about how God sets this up to be functional, how God sets this up to work. And so God creates the world, and he creates nature, and he orders nature, and then he creates humanity. And humanity is kind of a funny thing. And in fact, the Genesis story gets a lot of this, because humanity is both from nature and from God. God makes a man out of clay, and he breathes into it. Now, what does that mean? That means that we are from nature, we are made of the stuff of nature, but we also have the breath of God. That means that in one way, we're in between God and nature. And if you read the stories of Genesis 1 and 2, and you begin to see the purpose of God putting us in the garden, so you have, again, here's the garden. The purpose why he puts the man and the woman in the garden, because gender comes into play here and sex. The purpose that he puts them in the garden is, in fact, to rule over the garden. And it is, in fact, to tend the garden. And we are in the middle. We are God's representatives. We are God's viceroys. We are God's people on the ground in charge. We are made in God's image. Now, in the ancient world, part of what that meant was, as if you remember Saddam Hussein plastered Iraq with his image. In the ancient world, they would do that too. You plaster the world with your image. If you look at like Little Rascals or old videos, every school classroom had a flag and a picture of the president. You put your image everywhere, and humanity is given the image of God in creation. And again, as we talked about before, this is in a sense God's royal garden. This is where God goes to walk in the cool of the day. And so he puts the man and the woman in the garden to tend the garden, to fulfill the garden, but always according to his will. So what happens in the rebellion, when we rebel against God and we take the will in a different direction, again, I talked about this in the previous videos, when we take it in a different direction, God doesn't do the expected thing, which is to kill us and replace us. God, in fact, gives us the garden and takes a step back, and heaven and earth is divorced, and we start going about things our own way. But if you read Genesis 3, God does something along the way, and what he does is he curses nature. He curses the womb of the woman, which is her, in a sense, productive outlet in the vision of the ancient world. And he curses the man, his capacity to produce fruit, to produce food, to be a food producer. He curses their power, and he curses nature. And really what that does is, before, whereas God, humanity, nature was supposed to flow like this, what he in a sense does is humanity is in rebellion against God, and so then nature is in rebellion against us. So now when a woman gives birth, there's frustration. The language of Hebrew is between comparing what she experiences with the womb and what he experiences in the field. The language is identical. She experiences frustration in childbirth, and danger, and hazard, and pain, and that's exactly what he experiences in trying to make life work. In other words, nature has rebelled against us because we have rebelled against God, and a fully functioning creation is now out of whack. Prior to this, nature was our servant, as we were God's servant, but God still reigns over nature, but nature is in rebellion against us, and nature is now hazardous. Nature is now, in some senses, our enemy. Nature will take our life and take us out. And that's why the world is the way it is, says the Bible. Now, again, in my next video, I want to talk about miracles, but I'm already at 7.5 minutes, so wait until next time.